Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the bank while strangers shuffled across the marble floor carrying umbrellas and paperwork, too busy with their own lives to notice the old woman sitting silently in a wheelchair near the banker's office. But I noticed everything. I noticed Daniel's fingers tapping nervously against the desk. I noticed Stephen wiping sweat from his forehead every few seconds even though the room was cold. And I noticed the way both of my sons kept talking over each other, trying harder and harder to pressure the banker sitting across from them. There has to be some misunderstanding, Daniel snapped. We already explained the situation. Yes, Stephen added quickly. Our mother isn't really capable of handling these decisions anymore. The banker didn't answer immediately. He simply adjusted his glasses and studied the documents in front of him while the silence in the office became heavier by the second. I sat quietly behind them, my hands folded in my lap, listening to my own children discuss me like I wasn't even there. Then suddenly, the banker looked up. Not at them. At me. Mrs. Gloria Whitmore, he asked politely. The entire room went still. Slowly, I raised my hand. And for the first time that afternoon, both of my sons looked afraid. Daniel's confident expression cracked instantly. Stephen shifted in his seat so fast his chair scraped against the floor. They stared at me the same way people stare at ghosts. Like they never expected me to speak at all. There must be some mistake, Daniel stammered. Our mother gets confused sometimes. The banker's face tightened slightly, almost offended on my behalf. There is no mistake, sir, he replied calmly. Mrs. Whitmore personally requested this meeting several months ago. Only she has the authority to proceed. Several months ago. I watched those words hit my sons like a punch to the chest. That was the moment I realized something that made my stomach turn cold. They hadn't sent me to that nursing home because they were worried about my health. They sent me there because they thought I was finished. They thought I was too weak, too lonely, too forgotten to fight back. Stephen leaned forward aggressively. Then explained the restrictions on the estate. Without saying another word, the banker reached into a folder and slid a sealed envelope slowly across the desk toward me. The moment Daniel saw it, the color drained from his face. And suddenly I understood. Whatever was inside that envelope was something my sons never wanted me to see. Stay with me till the end, because what happens next will shock you. And if you love emotional revenge stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more. 6 months earlier, I still believed my family loved me. I believed the Sunday dinners meant something. I believed my sons cared about protecting me after my husband died. I never imagined they would slowly strip away my dignity piece by piece until I became nothing more than a burden they wanted hidden away. But looking back now, I realize the betrayal started long before the nursing home. I just didn't want to see it. My name is Gloria Whitmore, and this is my story. 8 years before that day in the bank, I buried my husband. Richard Whitmore had been the kind of man who filled every room without trying. Even after 43 years of marriage, I still reached for him in the middle of the night for months after he was gone. Grief does strange things to silence. It stretches it. Sharpens it. Some mornings, the quiet inside that house felt louder than any argument ever could. But my sons gave me purpose. Daniel and Stephen started visiting more after the funeral. At first, I thought they were worried about me living alone. Daniel brought groceries every Friday. Stephen fixed things around the house even when they didn't need fixing. And my grandchildren, oh, they brought life back into those empty rooms faster than anything else could. Every Sunday, my house became home again. I'd spend the morning baking apple pies while tiny feet thundered through the hallway upstairs. The television would hum in the background while someone laughed too loudly in the living room. By evening, every chair around the dining table would be filled. Those nights saved me. Daniel would wrap his arm around my shoulders and say, "Nobody cooks like Mom." Stephen always kissed my forehead before leaving. My daughters-in-law smiled politely while packing leftovers into containers I pretended not to notice disappearing from my kitchen every week. Back then, I thought love looked exactly like that. What I didn't notice were the little things hiding underneath. Daniel asking strange questions about the house deed while pretending it was casual conversation. So if something happened, would the house automatically go through probate? Stephen joking during dinner, "I call the basement when Mom finally leaves us this place." Everyone laughed. Even me. Now I remember the way their wives looked at each other afterward. Quiet. Quick. Like people sharing thoughts they didn't want spoken aloud. Still, whenever either of my sons needed help, I gave it without hesitation. Daniel's business struggled constantly. Stephen changed jobs so often I could barely keep track anymore. There was always some emergency, some overdue bill, some crisis involving the children. And every single time, I stepped in. I told myself that's what mothers do. Looking back now, I realize something painful. I mistook dependence for love. I thought needing me meant valuing me. Then came the fall. It was small, really. I slipped reaching for a pan in the kitchen and bruised my hip badly enough to scare everyone. The doctor said I was lucky. Nothing broken. Just rest for a few weeks. But my sons reacted like the world had ended. Suddenly they insisted on attending my appointments. Daniel told me I shouldn't drive at night anymore. Stephen started talking constantly about safety and future planning. At first, it felt like concern. Until one night, while passing the hallway, I overheard Daniel whispering to his brother in the kitchen. "We need to figure this out before it's too late." At the time, I thought he meant my health. Now I know he meant something very different. Section 3, First Red Flags, Subtle Betrayals. After my fall, something inside my family shifted so slowly that at first I couldn't even explain why it felt wrong. The changes were small, quiet, almost invisible. That's what made them dangerous. Stephen started speaking to me differently whenever other people were around. His voice became softer, slower, exaggerated in a way that made me feel 10 years older than I was. "Mom, remember what the doctor said. Mom, don't overdo it. Mom, you forgot your purse again." The strange part was, I hadn't forgotten anything. But every time he corrected me in front of someone, I noticed the embarrassed smiles people gave me afterward. Like they had already accepted I was slipping away mentally. Even my own grandchildren started looking at me differently sometimes, watching me carefully whenever I repeated a story or misplaced my reading glasses. Daniel became even more involved in my finances after the accident. At first, I appreciated the help. He organized bills, handled insurance calls, and balanced my accounts online because he claimed the technology stressed me out. "You shouldn't have to worry about all this anymore, Mom," he'd tell me warmly. But eventually I started noticing how defensive he became whenever I asked simple questions. One afternoon, I asked why my electric bill seemed unusually high. Daniel sighed heavily and rubbed his forehead like I was exhausting him. "I already handled it. You don't need to obsess over every little thing." Obsess. The word stayed with me long after he left. Family dinners slowly changed too. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Decisions were made before anyone bothered asking my opinion. Once, during Sunday dinner, I offered to host Thanksgiving like I had every year for decades. Daniel immediately shook his head. "That's probably too much stress for you now." His wife quickly jumped in. "We can do it at our house this year." Everyone agreed so fast it felt rehearsed. For the first time in my own family, I felt like a guest instead of the center holding everyone together. I remember standing alone in my kitchen after they left that night, staring at the untouched pie still sitting on the counter. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. It's strange how betrayal rarely arrives screaming. Sometimes it enters politely, carrying groceries and smiling at you. A few days later, I stopped by the bank to ask about some paperwork connected to my savings account. While waiting at the front desk, I noticed a document attached to my file with several highlighted tabs sticking out from the side. Before I could read it properly, Daniel suddenly appeared beside me. The timing startled me. "Oh good, you're here," he said quickly, taking the folder from the employee before I could touch it. I was already handling this. His smile looked forced. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had he been there? And why did he look nervous? That night, after everyone stopped calling, I sat alone in my bedroom and quietly opened the locked drawer inside my desk. The folder where I kept copies of my property papers was thinner than I remembered. Some documents were missing. And for the first time, fear truly entered my heart. Fear changes the way a person sees everything. Once I realized documents were missing from my desk, I started noticing things I had ignored for months. Little expressions. Sudden silences. Conversations that stopped the second I walked into a room. It was as if someone had slowly pulled a curtain back, revealing a version of my family I no longer recognized. Daniel became obsessed with paperwork. Every visit somehow turned into a conversation about signatures, insurance forms, account updates, or legal protections. He always explained everything too quickly, sliding papers across the kitchen table while speaking in that calm, patient tone people use with children. "Just sign at the bottom, Mom. It's only routine stuff." You know how complicated these things can get. At first, I signed because I trusted him. He was my son. The little boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried at his father's funeral. But now, every time I reached for a pen, something inside me hesitated. Stephen, meanwhile, became relentless about assisted living. You shouldn't be alone anymore. What if you fall again? You need people around you 24/7. The strange part was how little time either of them actually spent with me themselves. They talked constantly about my care while becoming emotionally more distant every week. One afternoon, I checked my bank statement while drinking tea in the living room and noticed several withdrawals I didn't recognize. They weren't massive amounts, but enough to unsettle me. When Daniel arrived later that evening, I asked him directly, "Did you move money from my account?" The question changed the entire atmosphere instantly. His jaw tightened. "Are you seriously accusing me of stealing from you?" "I didn't say stealing," I answered quietly. "I just don't remember authorizing these." Daniel let out a frustrated laugh and stood up from the couch. "This is exactly why we're worried about you, Mom. You forget things, then blame everyone else." The guilt hit me immediately. By the end of the conversation, I found myself apologizing to him. Apologizing. Even after he stormed out of my house angry. When your own children look at you with disappointment, you start questioning your own reality. You start wondering if maybe they're right. Maybe you are becoming confused. Maybe you are forgetting things. That thought terrified me more than anything. A week later, I secretly met with Harold Benson, an old family friend who had handled Richard's legal affairs for years. I brought copies of the documents I still had left and asked him to look them over. The moment Harold started reading, his expression changed. He removed his glasses slowly and leaned back in his chair. "Gloria," he said carefully, "do you fully understand everything you've signed recently?" A cold sensation spread through my chest. "What do you mean?" Harold hesitated before answering. "Some of these papers give your son significant control over your assets if concerns about competency are raised." The room suddenly felt smaller. For the first time, I understood I might not simply be dealing with overprotective children. I might be dealing with something far worse. But before Harold could explain further, my phone started ringing inside my purse. "Daniel." I ignored the call. Then it rang again. And again. By the time I returned home that evening, Daniel was already sitting in my driveway waiting for me. The moment I stepped out of the car, he looked directly at me and asked one terrifying question. "Why were you talking to a lawyer behind our backs?" After Daniel confronted me about visiting Harold, something inside me stopped feeling safe. He never explained how he knew where I had been. That frightened me more than his anger. From that moment forward, my life no longer felt like my own. Every decision I made seemed monitored somehow. If I left the house, one of my sons would call within the hour asking where I'd gone. If I sounded tired on the phone, Stephen suddenly appeared at my front door insisting he was just checking in. But the checking in slowly became control. Daniel took my spare car keys for emergencies. Stephen started organizing my medications into plastic containers, even though I had managed them perfectly fine for years. Every conversation somehow ended with words like safety, responsibility, or concern. The strangest part was how lonely all their attention felt. They controlled more of my life while giving me less of themselves. Days became painfully quiet after that. Sometimes I would sit at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at the empty chair where Richard used to read the newspaper while I washed dishes. The silence inside the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like waiting. Waiting for permission. Waiting for updates. Waiting for my own children to decide what happened to me next. Phone calls from my grandchildren became shorter too. Distracted. Polite. One evening my youngest granddaughter accidentally asked, "Mom says you get confused a lot now. Is that true, Grandma?" I smiled while answering her. Then I cried for almost an hour after we hung up. The worst part of betrayal isn't the anger. It's the humiliation. It's realizing people you love are slowly rewriting who you are while you're still alive to watch it happen. Over the next few weeks, little things inside my house started disappearing. Family photo albums vanished from the living room shelves. Important papers were no longer where I remembered placing them. Even Richard's old watch collection disappeared from the study cabinet one afternoon. Whenever I questioned anything, I got the same exhausted reactions. "Mom, nobody is taking your things. You probably misplaced them. You're imagining problems again." Again. That word started haunting me. One night, Stephen came by unexpectedly while talking loudly on the phone with his wife in the hallway. He didn't realize I was standing nearby when I heard him whisper angrily, "We can't keep waiting forever." The sentence froze me where I stood. Waiting for what? I barely slept that night. A few days later, I secretly called the assisted living facility my sons kept recommending. I told the receptionist I was gathering information for the future. The woman sounded cheerful and kind as she answered my questions. Then casually, without realizing what she was revealing, she said, "Oh yes, your son Daniel already toured the property months ago. He seemed very eager to reserve placement early. Months ago. Before my health had even worsened. Before anyone mentioned nursing homes to me seriously. I felt physically sick after hanging up the phone. That evening, when Daniel stopped by with groceries, I finally confronted him. You planned this already, didn't you?" He stared at me blankly. Then slowly, his expression hardened. "Mom," he said carefully, "you're starting to sound paranoid." Stephen arrived shortly afterward, and suddenly both of them were standing in my living room exchanging worried looks over my head like doctors discussing a difficult patient. And for the first time in my life, I realized my own sons might already be preparing to take everything from me. After that confrontation, everything happened so fast it felt like my life was slipping downhill before I could find something solid to hold on to. Daniel and Stephen stopped pretending their conversations about assisted living were merely suggestions. Suddenly every discussion became urgent. They spoke in firm, rehearsed tones like men trying to finalize a business arrangement instead of talking about their mother's future. "You can't stay alone anymore. It's temporary until we figure things out. We're doing this because we love you." Those words became their shield for everything that followed. One morning Daniel arrived carrying a folder full of documents and set them down on my kitchen table. "We found a wonderful place," he said carefully. "Just for a little while." I didn't even touch the papers. "I'm not leaving my home." The room fell silent. Stephen sighed dramatically and rubbed his temples. "Mom, why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" Harder. As though my fear was an inconvenience to them. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. They called constantly. They involved their wives. Even my grandchildren started repeating phrases that clearly came from adult conversations. "We just want you safe, Grandma." The emotional exhaustion became overwhelming. Every day felt like standing trial inside my own house. Then came the morning that shattered whatever trust one still had left. I woke up to the sound of trucks outside. At first, I thought someone nearby was moving into the neighborhood. But when I looked through the front window, I saw two movers carrying boxes toward my driveway while Daniel spoke to them beside the truck. For a moment, I genuinely thought there had been some mistake. I opened the front door in my robe, confused and terrified. "What is this?" Daniel immediately walked toward me with forced calm written across his face. "Mom, remember? We talked about this." "No," I whispered. "No, we didn't." Stephen appeared behind him holding paperwork in his hand. "You agreed this was temporary." I stared at the signatures on the pages they showed me. My name was there. Shaky. Uneven. I vaguely remembered signing forms during one of the many stressful appointments they arranged for me over recent months. But I had never agreed to leave my home. "I didn't understand what those were," I said, my voice trembling. Daniel's patience disappeared instantly. "Mom, please stop doing this." Doing this. Like my panic was performance. Neighbors watched quietly through windows while strangers carried pieces of my life out the front door. Family photographs. Richard's books. My clothes. 40 years of memories packed into cardboard boxes by people who never even looked me in the eye. I remember clutching one framed picture of Richard so tightly my hands hurt. And through all of it, I kept waiting for one of my sons to stop everything. To suddenly realize how cruel this had become. But neither of them did. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and loneliness. The staff tried to be kind, but kindness from strangers cannot replace betrayal from family. The first night there, I sat on the edge of that narrow bed staring at the small suitcase beside me and realized something horrifying. They weren't planning for me to come home. 2 weeks later, another resident mentioned seeing my house listed online for sale. I felt the blood drain from my face. That evening I called Daniel immediately. "You're selling my home?" There was a long silence before he finally answered coldly, "We can't keep putting our lives on hold forever, Mom." That sentence broke something inside me. But 3 days later, Harold Benson walked quietly into the nursing home carrying a leather briefcase. And for the first time in months, hope walked into the room with him. When Harold Benson walked into that nursing home, I barely recognized the feeling that came over me. Hope. Real hope. For months, I had felt like I was drowning slowly while everyone around me pretended the water wasn't rising. But the moment Harold sat beside me and opened his briefcase, something changed in his expression that made me sit up straighter. "Gloria," he said quietly, "before Richard passed away, the two of you established financial protections connected to a separate investment account." I frowned. What kind of protections? The kind meant for situations exactly like this. My heart started pounding. Harold explained that years earlier, Richard had insisted certain assets remain protected unless I personally approved every transfer while mentally competent. Any unusual activity involving the estate automatically triggered reviews at the bank, including attempts to move ownership too quickly, including suspicious pressure from family members. And suddenly, for the first time, all the strange behavior from my sons began making horrifying sense. "They've been trying to gain control for months," I whispered. Harold nodded carefully. "And the bank noticed." 3 days later, Daniel and Stephen arrived at the nursing home acting strangely cheerful. Stephen even brought coffee for me, something he hadn't done in weeks. "We're taking care of a few final financial details today," Daniel explained casually. "Then everything should settle down." I looked at both of them for a long moment. Neither one realized I already knew. During the drive to the bank, they argued quietly in the front seat while pretending I couldn't hear them. "What if she says something?" "She won't. She's been acting strange lately." The words stung more than I expected. Not because they thought I was weak. Because they sounded so confident about it. By the time we entered the crowded bank lobby, rain was hammering against the windows outside. Daniel walked ahead carrying folders while Stephen pushed my wheelchair beside him, both moving with the nervous energy of men desperate for something to go exactly according to plan. Inside the office, they immediately took control of the conversation. "She gets tired easily," Stephen explained to the banker. Daniel added quickly, "We'll handle the paperwork for her." I sat silently while they spoke about me like I was already gone. Then the banker looked up from the documents. "Actually," he interrupted calmly, "Mrs. Whitmore specifically requested personal authorization only." The room changed instantly. Daniel's face tightened. Stephen stopped moving completely behind my wheelchair. And then came the moment that shattered everything. "Mrs. Gloria Whitmore," the banker asked respectfully. I slowly raised my hand. Both of my sons looked stunned. "There must be some mistake," Daniel said quickly. "Our mother gets confused." The banker's expression hardened slightly. "There is no mistake, sir." Then he reached into a folder and slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. The second Daniel saw it, all the color drained from his face. "What is that?" Stephen asked sharply. The banker folded his hands together calmly. "Documentation connected to the estate review process." My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of financial transfers, property activity records, and handwritten notes Harold had encouraged me to keep over the last several months. Every missing document. Every suspicious withdrawal. Every attempt to pressure me into surrendering control. Proof. Daniel suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous." People nearby began glancing toward the office. Stephen leaned closer to me desperately. "Mom, after everything we've done for you." "No," I interrupted quietly. For the first time in months, both of them fell silent. I looked directly at my sons and finally saw the truth without excuses softening it. "This was never about helping me," I said. "You buried me before I was even gone." The shame on their faces lasted only a second before anger replaced it. But it was too late. The banker calmly informed them all transfer requests were now frozen pending formal investigation into possible elder financial exploitation. And suddenly, the two men who had spent months convincing me I was powerless looked absolutely terrified. I leaned back slowly in my wheelchair and realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid anymore. That was the moment I knew I had to do something. The strange thing about finally seeing the truth is that once you do, fear begins losing its power. After the meeting at the bank, Daniel barely spoke during the drive back to the nursing home. Stephen kept muttering under his breath, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Neither of them looked at me anymore. Neither of them spoke to me like I was confused or fragile. For the first time in months, they spoke to me like I was dangerous. And honestly, that realization gave me strength. The very next morning, Harold returned with more paperwork. Real paperwork this time. Not rushed signatures slid across kitchen tables under pressure. He sat beside me carefully explaining every page while I read each word slowly myself. Together, we began undoing everything my sons had manipulated me into signing. The bank investigation moved quickly after that. Suspicious account activity connected to Daniel's business debts immediately raised concerns. Several transfers had been made from my savings toward accounts tied to his failing company. Stephen's financial records revealed gambling debt far worse than I had imagined. Suddenly, the same men who claimed I was incapable of understanding finances were desperately trying to explain their own. Daniel called constantly during those weeks. At first he sounded angry, then defensive, then emotional. Finally, one evening, he arrived at the nursing home alone and sat across from me with tears in his eyes. "I was trying to protect this family," he whispered. I looked at him for a very long time before answering. "No, Daniel. You were trying to protect yourself." The silence afterward felt enormous. A week later, Harold helped arrange my release from the nursing home. I still remember the feeling of sunlight on my face as I walked outside carrying my own suitcase instead of being wheeled somewhere by someone else. It sounds small, but after months of losing control over my life, even holding my own bag felt powerful. I moved into a small cottage across town using money from the protected investment account Richard had created years earlier. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it was peaceful. Mine. Every photograph on the walls belonged where I placed it. Every room felt honest. Meanwhile, the consequences around my sons kept growing. Daniel lost a major business partnership after rumors about the financial investigation spread publicly. Stephen's wife discovered the full extent of his gambling problems during the legal review process, and their marriage quickly began collapsing under the weight of lies he could no longer hide. But the most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. A month after everything unraveled, Daniel showed up at my cottage asking for financial help again. For years, I would have given it instantly. This time, I opened the door only halfway. "You taught me something important," I told him quietly. "Love without respect becomes permission for abuse." He looked shattered hearing those words. And for the first time in his life, I let him walk away without rescuing him. That night, sitting alone on my porch, I realized something I never thought possible. I wasn't destroying my family. I was finally protecting what remained of it. The months after everything happened were quieter than I expected. Not happier immediately. Not easier. Just quieter. For a long time, my life had been filled with tension I didn't even recognize while I was living inside it. Constant phone calls. Pressure. Confusion. Fear disguised as concern. When all of that suddenly disappeared, the silence felt unfamiliar at first. But eventually, it began feeling peaceful. My little cottage slowly turned into a real home. I planted flowers beside the porch the way Richard used to love, and every morning I watered them while drinking coffee in the cool air before the neighborhood woke up. I hung old family photographs carefully across the hallway walls, though I noticed I chose fewer pictures of Daniel and Stephen than I once would have. Not out of hatred. Just honesty. Some wounds changed the shape of love forever. The investigation into my finances eventually ended without criminal charges, but the damage to my son's reputations spread quickly through people who once respected them. Daniel's business partnership collapsed completely after investors lost trust in him. Stephen's gambling addiction became impossible to hide once his debts surfaced during the financial review, and within weeks his wife separated from him. Neither of them lost everything. But both of them lost the image they had carefully built of themselves. And maybe that hurt more. The grandchildren slowly started finding their way back to me after the truth became harder for the family to ignore. Some visited quietly after school. Others called late at night just to talk. I never poisoned them against their fathers. No matter what happened, those boys were still their family. But children notice more than adults think they do. One afternoon, my oldest granddaughter sat beside me on the porch swing and asked softly, "Did Dad really try to take your house?" I looked out toward the garden for a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said quietly. "But people sometimes do terrible things when fear and greed become stronger than love." She nodded slowly like she understood more than a child should. Daniel attempted to apologize several times after that. Long messages. Voicemails. Even handwritten letters. One arrived in the mail nearly 6 months later, folded carefully inside an envelope with my name written shakily across the front. I placed it unopened inside my kitchen drawer. Not because I wanted revenge. Because some wounds heal, and others simply stop bleeding. One evening near sunset, I sat alone on my porch listening to birds settle into the trees while warm light stretched across the yard. For the first time in years, nobody was asking me to sign anything. Nobody was questioning my memory. Nobody was deciding my future for me. And sitting there in that quiet little cottage, I realized something that brought tears to my eyes. I survived the darkest chapter of my life not because someone saved me, but because I finally chose myself.